Good afternoon. Can I welcome everybody for this meeting? And we will go through the agenda. And the agenda item 1 is notice of recording stroke webcast. Can I remind members that to note that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that the members of the public stroke press stroke public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Noted. Agenda item 2 is apologies. I think we got the full house.
Yeah, everyone's here.
Thank you. And agenda item 3 is declaration of interest. Can I remind members that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and other registrable interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. Is that noted here? Agenda item 4 is action notes and action tracker. To agree the action notes of the meeting held on 16th March 2023 and note the action tracker. Is that agreed? Noted. Anything arising from those? None? Thank you. Agenda item 5 is reducing fly tipping. And we got Paul Pritchett, Environmental Health Officer, in attendance, as well as Councillor Majid Mahmood, Cabinet Member for Environment, and Darren Shea, Assistant Director, Street Scene, and Jenny Berry, City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer. And this meeting is about formal tracking has been completed. And the purpose of the report is to consider the further information the committee had requested regarding cameras and prosecution strategies. And I'll ask the cabinet member if we can start with him first.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And thanks so much. It's good to see a full house in formal council meeting. We had one in Trust and Charities the other day. We needed a decision. It's really good to see a full house. Just coming back on to what you've asked from me as the cabinet lead and the lead officers around the appendix, it's all in the appendix recommendation 1. So I'll just take you through all of them. We'll go through the cameras first. The Grime Watch, obviously, I think it was cross-party. Members weren't happy with the initial figures that we had for episode 1 and 2 of the Grime Watch and the gap that was between episode 1 and 2. That's been clarified in the report back to you today. I'm pleased to say that the latest Grime Watch video that we released through the comms team has done significantly better than the previous 2 episodes. If you look at the stats, we've had 569 views on YouTube and 2,880 actual views of the tweet. If you combine the 4 social media posts that BCC posted, it came to 4,868. That was in the first week. If you compare that to episode 1, that got 2,693 in 13 posts. And episode 2 only got 1,362 in 11 posts. So I'm pleased that we've managed to get more coverage from Grime Watch episode 3. And also the Birmingham Live picked up on it as well on the 31st of March. And it was titled, Mystery Has Mountains of Dumb Tyres Across City. But that's what we were looking for. And that was the conversation I had with officers, try to get something in on that Grime Watch video, which would attract more media attention. So really pleased with the efforts of the comm teams at BCC, analysing data and also identifying new ways to improve coverage. And obviously, thanks to the members here who highlighted that to us in the previous meeting. Also considering looking at investigating the use of some of our partners in the Asian media. They cover a number of channels now on Sky and cable, and they do have a wide reach in the community. Around the CCTV deployment, since the last meeting, we've now started emailing elected members once there's CCTV in their wards, and I'm also copied in so I can ensure that the emails are going out. But this hasn't been obviously by members, and a lot of the officers are going through the numerous requests that they get on a daily basis as to the requests and the criteria that we've adopted for the installation of cameras also detailed in that report to you. And the timetable also for installation of CCTV. We also ask all members to email flytip@birmingham.gov.uk if you do get requests for CCTV from either residents or community groups. So that gives the officers an opportunity to collect the evidence and review the intelligence so that they can allocate the resources to the worst affected areas. And as the report says, it's 12 weeks that the CCTV is adopted. Some good news, actually. Last week, we put in a bid for 50,000 to the government from a 775,000 grant for reduction of fly tipping. And we secured 47,000. They never gave us the full 50 because some of the money was allocated for signage and leaflet. They said that wasn't part of the capital bid. We've got the 47,000 that will pay for some new CCTV. Again, that increased our resources on the each demand. We do have a word of caution, actually. This is just from a personal experience. My board, we were quite fortunate to be allocated CCTV for a former car park at Hodgell Common. They were installed a few weeks back, but since then we have had 3 incidents of fly tipping. That will be investigated. Hopefully, we'll be able to catch the perpetrators. So, CCTV isn't always the answer. We need to have all work needs to be done with residents, community groups, and so to try to have some education in the schools, and following on in the second report you see where we're trying to get more of an educational program put in place, and also waste prevention needs to step up as well. But we want to get to a stage where no one considers having to fly tip. So it's going to be a constant battle. We're doing our best. Around the localization aspect of that, there's that's also contained in the report. This is ongoing, and this is also based on dialogue from members. I initially kicked it off before I even appeared to scrutiny when I sent a survey to all elected members, all 101. I think we got 67 or 68 replied. So it's a good turnout in terms of responses, and that data has been collected by the depots. Also, the historical data that they have themselves. And I think you've all had, other than Perry, everyone's had an opportunity to visit their depot to speak to the assistant service managers around the street schedules for their wards as well, and also to put any more data they want to put in and to tackle any deep-rooted issues that they have. We've engaged with Love Your Environment now. I'm not sure, I think we've got 2 of the wards now in the city, but we've done a good job here there. And 50 of the top wards in the city, they get a Love Your Environment day at the moment. And we've started also to advertise them with members. We did have a pin where operations, the officer was advertising to members because it may encourage compliance. There had been 2 bad experiences where we did advertise and there was some blind. But we're going ahead with that, and we're putting trust and confidence in all members to ensure that it's not being used back. If you remember, for those of you who've been in the council for a long time, when we used to have special street collections, it's not a special street collection. It's a Love Your Environment means the officers go and have an award. It's not one where people are contributing to the streets like we've done before with the special street collections. That was the word of caution around that. And we're also going to, partly to fly tipping, but we're also doing just the confidence of the whole street cleansing operation and refuse collection. We've got the new in-cab service, which is now operational across the 4 depots. Or is it 3 depots? 3 depots now, isn't it? Yeah, the 3 depots, because Montague Street now has formally moved into Atlas Works, so we're left with 3 depots. All members will be invited potentially next week or possibly the week after, but definitely this month of April. So you can also see the new monitoring system that we have for refuse collections, because collections have come down significantly. I think that's played a big role in doing that. I'll leave it there.
Next cabinet member, Councillor Harmer.
Okay, so a couple of points. Thank you for the report, Councillor Mood. First of all, on the comment that Waste Enforcement Unit are arranging detailed discussions with Barking and Dagenham Waste Enforcement in order to fully understand their operational processes, with a further update to be provided on completion. I mean, it's disappointing that that's still being arranged when this is something that, we picked up, I don't know how long ago it was. It feels like, quite a long time ago, that there was a different approach being used, and that we felt that the Barking Dagenham style approach was more appropriate. So to hear that they still haven't actually had those discussions is disappointing. And I hope that they are done promptly, and that we can hear about improvements that will be made following them. Secondly, and I'm not, while there's a lot of focus on cameras and fixed penalty notices, and I still don't think we've got enough cameras, and I'd be interested to hear what Cabinet Member and Darren feel would actually be an appropriate number of cameras to actually really get on top of the problem, because I'm sure the clever fly tipper will just say, well, the cameras are over there, right? We'll fly tip somewhere else now. But it's also about having a sort of coherent strategy, and just bring up a specific example that Darren is directly aware of. He came with me to site visit to Oxford Road in Acourt Stream, which joins the Warwick Road, and there's a lot of HMOs nearby and flats above the shops. And he kindly agreed to put an extra 2 large bins in that area, because the bins that were there weren't coping with the volume, and we know a lot of that comes from the flats above the shops. And that has made a significant difference, because it keeps the litter off the road, and that sort of discourages people fly tipping, because they see, people fly tipping encourages fly tipping, and piles of waste encourages fly tipping. However, a couple of weeks ago, the waste team who were picking it up noticed that there was some trade waste in there, so they didn't empty the bins. So the bins became overflowing, so there was side waste. Now, that just seems to be the wrong strategy. If there's trade waste going in there, what you should do is ask waste enforcement to go around to the local shops and businesses and check they've all got waste contracts, and not leave the bins unemptied, because that then that's a fly tipping spot, isn't it? There's piles of rubbish there. And there has been further fly tipping, I gather, a few days ago, with what looks like the contents of an HMO just being dumped there. So that is an area that I would have thought should be primed for cameras. But if we're not going to get cameras, we at least have to empty the bins, even when they have been contaminated with trade waste, until we sort those trade issues out. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dr. Armour. Cabinet Member.
Thank you, Chair. Engagement with Bath and Dagenham. That is a two-way approach, though. Obviously, engagement hasn't been carried out, whether it's the fault of BCC or the fault of Bath, and that's, I'll leave that to the officers to respond to. Obviously, we're a big city. There's nearly 1.2 million people in the city. We cover literally thousands of highway parks, and how many CCTV do we need to stop the problem? Because I agree with you, Hodge. I'll give you an example. Hodge, your comment. Although the fly tipping has decreased significantly with the installation of the CCTV, fly tipping has increased in nearby vicinity. So how do you follow it? We have a camera be able to follow, but technology, there's lots of innovative technology, and we are looking at new ways of new CCTV. There's some solar panel CCTV which is available, which you don't need a lamp post to fit on anywhere. There's also a conversation being had with partners in city operations on joint usage of CCTV. They also have CCTV that relates to other issues, whether we can use that CCTV. That's something for legal to respond to, but that conversation is ongoing. And I agree with you, fly tipping does encourage more fly tipping. Whenever you see, even if there's been a drop collection and there's some black bags, people think, well, hang on, I can just dump some stuff here because this will eventually get picked up. The policy that we have is if there is contaminated waste in a residue bin or recycling bin, it is tagged, and the following week is then picked up. So it should only be a week, just to let the resident know that, look, we know what you've done wrong. You shouldn't have contaminated the bin. And with trade waste, well, I'm assuming in that particular instance, the waste enforcement officers, the refuse collection teams may have assumed the waste enforcement officers wanted to come to check the bin, the contents, to see if there's any prosecution of the business that has fly tipped in those bins. The good news is we have increased the number of enforcement officers, and that will mean that there will be an increase in duty of care visits to shops to ensure that they do have trade waste contracts in place, so that we are assured as a council that they are disposing the waste correctly. Is there anything the officers want to add, especially around the barking?
Yeah, thank you. With regards to the welcome and down approach, I'm sure most of you will remember Martin Smith, who was in place before he retired last year. So he may well have made some inroads, but I've not been able to find anything through searches of any stuff that he's left for me. I've been in touch with the operations manager at Barking and Dagenham numerous times, and I'm struggling to get a response from them. So I'm now looking to step that up to effectively go over the head for lack of a better term, just try and make that contact there. So that is still being worked on, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get in touch with them and discuss what's there. What I will do is just caveat that with saying to be cautious around hopes for improvements that might be able to be made off the back of those conversations. Now, we're always going to take on any best practice. We want the best in class, definitely. But there'll be a little bit of thought that we would take that on. The reason I make that caveat is we have reviewed a lot of what we do, and we also have to, as it says in the report, keep mind to things like codes of practice. So I would argue that we are very much best in class at the moment. However, we're always open to suggestions from the local authorities to see what's been done there and any of that can be brought in. And then just, although not in specific, I'll just touch briefly on the issue with the waste being left in the trade waste bins, or sorry, in the bins of the trade waste. That is something that we are working with waste management to try and get the technology in place that referrals can come through easily. So we are hopeful that in the not too distant future, there may be some streamlining that's available through the use of the science technology being able to speed directly to something that perhaps officers and my team would have.
The first point was about Grime Watch. I still don't understand why there's been this massive gap. I don't think the paragraph here, 1.1, explains clearly why there's been a gap between March and November between the first Grime Watch and the second one. So I wondered if Darren could explain what that paragraph means, because I didn't understand it. That was the first thing. Also, I think it'd be really good if we can have some feedback on Grime Watch. I don't know whether there is stuff on the website, but I know that when Barking and Dagenham came and talked to us about this, I've still got the quote here. At least one person caught every episode, including a husband who reported his wife, a mum who handed herself in after her daughter's friend spotted her, and a lady who was spotted by several people. Her son then called to pay the fine and sign her up for Green Garden waste collection. You know, could we have some feedback? Because that would then perhaps, encourage the public that something was happening. So that was the first point about Grime Watch. The second was about the CCTV. It's good that we're deploying these, all in favour, obviously. But I think that in terms of localisation, we've had one installed locally in my ward, which has been great. Obviously, it's only there for a few weeks, which is unfortunate, but that's how, it is. You can explain that. But the point is, if you're going to localise this, then councillors need to know, I think, they need to have a contact point to say, who is the camera sort of enforcement person. I struggled to find out who in environmental health was dealing with this. I did find somebody in the end. I found an officer and he did respond to me. But it would be really helpful to know, who the officer contact is for your camera and what the outcomes are and what's happening as a result of the camera being there. Also, I don't know whether it's possible for the camera to come back. The fly tipping at this location is still continuing. That's partly because I think we need housing to get their act together, to get the gate put back up in this access way. And I think there's been an issue. So, localisation means that we need a contact, I think, and we need some feedback and know who to talk to. And in terms of prosecution strategies, which was the last bit of the report, I think it's good that you're trying to talk to Barking and Dagenham. I cannot understand that there should be a problem with contacting them. This council politically has great links with Barking and Dagenham. The leader of the council, it has a link. I think that the leader in Barking and Dagenham was a mentor for our leader. So, there should be no problem. If you can't do it officer-wise, then go politically, maybe through Councillor Mahmood and get him to sort it out through Ian if needed. There is a way of doing these things. Let's just get on with it. So that was that point. And the other thing, I just think, what we all felt, I think, when we heard Barking and Dagenham talk to us, was that, yes, there are codes of practice. We know that. But it's pretty obvious that Barking and Dagenham take a risk. The code of practice is only guidance. It's guidance, isn't it? And I think Barking and Dagenham, from what I can see here, it just says in relation to issuing fines, Barking and Dagenham's view is that if people are caught, then they're eligible for fines. They don't need court processes and there is a lower burden of proof. If the fine is not paid, they're taken to court. The council has not lost a fly tipping case. So if that council can do this, why can't Birmingham? I think that's what we all felt. That's what we want you to really look into. And I would like, Chair, I'm not sure what's going to happen to this committee, but I would like there to be a report back to whichever committee takes on the role of this committee as a result of the Barking and Dagenham work.
Thanks, thank you, Chair. Thank you, for those comments and questions. In terms of the gaps between episode 1 and 2, that's because the length of time that's taken for the investigations to take place into the instance that taken place. Because remember, we only put footage onto the Crime Watch once the officers have exhausted all avenues. So they only come on as a last resort because that's it. We've basically exhausted everything. We've tried to trace the owner of the vehicle, etc. So that's the gap. That's the reason for the gap. The officers could elaborate on that. Going forward around the prosecutions, I have asked officers if they can include prosecutions on the next sort of Crime Watch episode. So like episode 2, if we've been successful, the prosecution should be in episode 3 at the start. All prosecutions are notified to the Licensed Public Protection Committee anyway on a monthly basis. I think we send an email through to the roster there. If local members could also be notified when there's a prosecution. What I think it is actually happening, because I did receive an email about an incident in my ward, but that could be because I'm also cabinet member as well. I did get an email when there's a prosecution in my ward. I don't see any reason why that should happen. And in terms of risks that the council takes, we've had this discussion before and you're all aware of my view, but I will leave that to Jamie as the punching officer to advise the committee on the position of the council.
Member, Councillor Wood.
Thanks, Chair. I was just following up on some of the things that Councillor Hahn and Councillor Bridle have just raised. It says in there that the gap between Crime Watch 1 and Crime Watch 2 is down to having to prove the footage and stuff like that. If you look at just about any of the crime programmes on TV, etc., I would have thought that when we're looking at the cameras, it's pretty obvious that fly tipping is actually happening, whether we've proved it or not, or whether we've got it in court or not. Why can't we anonymise the vehicle, pixelate the face, and just say, these are under investigation? There is absolutely... we stopped finding reasons not to do things. I mean, yeah, if you can advertise that these things are happening, we know they're happening, we're doing things about it, that's prevention, which leads me on to the camera thing. I think I asked the question before whether CCTV cameras have got to be, they can't be covert, is that right? Or they've got to be...
There are mechanisms to deploy them covertly, but they're not what we're using the cameras for at the moment.
So if the camera's in situ, does the sign warning that the camera's in situ need to be underneath it? Or can the camera, or does it just need to be a warning that says we are filming?
As far as I'm aware, it needs to be within sight of the camera. So within reasonable vicinity.
So they've got, so if somebody walks in, they've got to be able to find the camera.
I believe so.
The main, if I may.
I think you could do check it out.
So as regards CCTV, if it's going to be in the, so not covert, overt, there has to be significant signage in the locality of the camera to warn everybody that they are likely to be filmed. Because if we fail to do that, capturing of any footage of an innocent bystander, passerby, for example, is potentially a criminal act. And it also breaches various GDPR and other human rights principles because there is a right to privacy. So if we are using an overt CCTV camera, we are not quite saying to flood the area with signage, but we have to sort of respond to a reasonable test, which is a reasonable person walking in that vicinity would reasonably understand that they may be filmed, either walking past, like doing the shopping, waiting for the bus, whatever it is. Just to put in that contrary, covert use of a camera is very highly legislated, and it covers, it is for the regulation of the Investigatory Powers Act, and that also has been strengthened recently for predominantly for anti-terrorism purposes. To do covert footage is an incredibly lengthy process, and you have to have your evidence tested by the magistrates' court. So there is no guarantee that a request for covert camera surveillance, for example, would pass the very tall order tests now that are in place and have to satisfy a magistrate's court. And also it's very time limited as well, and it's subject to stringent review and inspection. I'm the council's senior responsible officer, with oversight for all covert footage, surveillance, any form of regulatory Investigatory Powers Act issues, and it is a very, very draconian process to go through, and probably that you're talking about, it's actually probably takes longer to get the authorisation for covert footage than it would for some of the more overt actions that you're seeking.
Right, and perhaps I probably came across slightly wrong in that one. My reason for highlighting it is that if the signage doesn't need to actually say the cameras are above you, we've already heard that there's a shortage of cameras, so why don't we cover the place with signs saying that you could be filmed, you could be getting filmed, and then move the cameras about? To me, that's a bit of a no-brainer.
So if you're going to have a mobile camera, so for example, a mobile camera is one that is used, say, on top of a car or driving around an area, usually around school crossing patrol, something like that, around road safety issues. You do have to undertake different steps to say this time.
You're coming back with another thing again.
If you have a fixed, you normally in CCTV have to have a fixed located camera on a particular pole, lamppost, side of a building, for example. So CCTV is predominantly a fixed camera in a fixed place, and it's the discretion actually of the council about how often you turn that on as well.
Again, that's not actually what I'm saying.
No.
What I'm saying is that with the cameras that we've got, that we fixed to a lamppost or whatever, we've already said that they're in place for 12 weeks, and then we take them out, we stick them somewhere else. So when we take them out and stick them somewhere else, why don't we leave the signage in place, saying that it's still there? That to me is an no-brainer.
You can leave the signage there because it's the same thing of actually you leave the camera there with the signs, but you turn the camera off and then periodically turn it on. So as long as the sign's there, so you can do that.
We'll cover all the hotspots with signage then.
Jenny, Councillor Mark.
I didn't have an answer to my point about the risk issue, why we can't. You can say something about that, and Jenny can say something about that, and it's code of practice. That's your area. And also just about, can we have this local contact if the camera goes in position in our wards? That would be real localisation, that we know which contact. That's possible.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So the second part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Jodie, answer my point?
So on the policy around
It's this code of practice that means that we can't seem to issue fines as liberally as Barking and Dagenham do.
okay,
Because
so
we're following that code of guidance, it sounds like, to the letter. I don't know what they're doing, or maybe we need to wait till they've told us and then you can report back on that.
maybe we do have to wait. So fixed penalty notices and the issuing of those are not a responsibility of legal services. So legal services have no role in the issuing of a fixed penalty notice. Legal services appear at the very, very end of that when there's been a failure to respond to a fixed penalty notice. And then we look at enforcement. There is a different code of practice that we are duty bound to follow and have no discretion. So that's the Crown Prosecution Service sort of criminal enforcement policy. We have no ability to just treat that as discretion. We are, as lawyers, we are duty bound to follow that. And the advice we give based on the evidence of we're going to prosecute for failure to respond to a fixed penalty notice has to be based on the Crown Prosecution Service enforcement policy. And that is around a sort of criminal, well, more or less to a criminal standard, but it's also about, is there sufficient evidence? The two basic principles of that code of practice that we have to justify before we issue is sufficient evidence to prosecute on a reasonable prospect of success, and is it in the public interest to prosecute? So those are the two tests when we're evaluating the evidence that comes to us.
I think we need a report back then from the
No, I understand the members are alluding to. They're basically saying that Barton just served notice when they, what in their mind, what is sufficient evidence? They seem to be more lax in terms of where the approach that we're adopting as a council. But I agree, once we've spoken to the office of Barton Dagenham and they've spoken to our officers, we can have a table as to what they foresee as risk and what we foresee as risk if we come to some middle ground. But yeah, I think a report does need to come back to this committee, whatever shape or form it is. Councillor Woodwin.
I think the question has been answered already. I suppose it's just a little bit of a question about CCTV, because there's a number of areas in the city where there are CCTV in wards. Castlevale, for one, I know for a fact through the Safer Streets programme there's going to be some in Scotland Green. But we don't have, I know for Castlevale, we don't have loads and loads of signs everywhere saying you're being filmed on CCTV. And that concerns me now that if something's not happening, it needs to be happening. And especially, I suppose, in other communities like Scotland Green as well. But also, I just a bit of a, so there's that, but a bit of a push on this. I know you were saying we're going to wait for what's coming back from Barker and Dagenham, but I just not to prepared to take risks. We can't. I can't. I don't understand any other way of looking at this. If somebody dumps rubbish, right, and we know they've dumped rubbish, like there was a case in Castlevale where we got the name and the address of the person, all this stuff. We know who it was, and I don't know what's happened to that. But if we haven't prosecuted that person, I'm a bit gobsmacked that we're not prepared to take a risk on when there's a photo of somebody in the black bag and all of that sort of stuff. I think we've got to move from this kind of hugely risk-averse place into a place where, you know, start taking some risks. And if that means is that in the public interest? I would say it's always in the public interest if somebody's citing rubbish that we do this. And if that's part of the test, then I think, you know, part of the test. But that's just my point of view. I just accept that. Not irregardless, but, you know, once we see what Barker and Dagenham do, we've got to move very quickly and be able to take them risks, because do you know what? We can't be having people dumping rubbish everywhere. And we can't be seeing that's so risk averse that we're not prepared to prosecute criminals.
Yeah, would it assist if I just advise what the test is for first penalty notice? So the law around first penalty notices is aimed at non-lawyers, it's not at a legal department. It's aimed at enforcement teams, like ones that Darren will represent, so that they are actually on the street of their action. The test that a fixed penalty notice in lieu of prosecution should only be issued when all of the following apply. So it's very long, but I'll just say the two that are relevant for the debate for this afternoon. The enforcement officer has reason to believe that an offence has been committed, and there is sufficient evidence of the alleged offender's guilt to support prosecution if the fixed penalty is unpaid. Now, the key sentence in this bit is reason to believe. So I think what it is that perhaps is an opportunity for both legal services and Darren's teams. Well, Darren Paul's teams, however, with supported by Councillor Mahmood, probably to have more of a sort of a workshop style around what is the understanding for Birmingham of the centred use of the phrase reason to believe. Now, what happens is that because when it comes to legal, we have got to remember that the enforcement officer is not a lawyer. And I think that is the important distinction. And I think that's what the workshop should iron out in return, so that we respect the two different professions that are looking at enforcement.
So the lawyer has, as I've indicated earlier, we have a much stricter burden of proof to qualify, and a much stricter set of principles in order to, because our first principle and our first duty is to the court. So as I've said earlier, our priority is, do we comply with the Crown? So therefore, what we have to challenge in a workshop, I think, is balancing between the strict duty that we have to go to court with, which is we don't waste court time, we don't waste public funds, we don't unnecessarily prosecute someone who is innocent, for example, because that is around public interest. And what we have to test out, I think, is that difference between what would legal say we can just get past the Crown Prosecution Service bar of challenge for evidence for prosecution of failure to comply with fixed penalty notices, and does that align with a reason to believe in terms of issuing that fixed penalty notice? It's quite convoluted. I apologise for that, but I do think perhaps going forward we are perhaps just short of a workshop programme. So I've been responsible for legal services now
6 months. I'm acutely aware, and I've spoken to Councillor Idris and other members around the challenges that I've picked up in legal services. I do think there is a need for better communication between the two teams. I think it's not been empowered, and that is not the fault of any officer that is in the council at the moment. I think that's the fault of there has been too much churn in legal services at my level. That means that they haven't been able to focus on business as usual, about forward thinking, about what is the need of the business going forward. And I am aiming to rectify that with Councillor Idris. I'm aware because I've had a conversation prior to this meeting with Councillor Idris. But I do think that is the option, and I think that might help, because whilst Barking and Dagenham, if they issue a fixed penalty notice for everything, me with another hat on and the Section 151 with another hat on would say, how much is this costing? Is it a disproportionate spend on public use of resource? And so there is a very fine balance what we have to do. And you'll also start to question, I think, as a committee in, say, a year's time, if we do this, there's a disproportionate view of this is the fixed penalty notices that are legal for prosecution. They'll start to look unbalanced, perhaps, and a bit disproportionate, I would imagine. So therefore, we need to just check on that. And that going back to education, understanding of reasonable belief. Okay, reasonable belief. And that my department also needs to maintain dialogue with the court service as well. In terms of if we're having an increased volume of prosecutions, we need to advise the court service as well, because they need to make court time for us. We're still in the legal world suffering with the backlog of cases from COVID, believe it or not. So we are a different sort of dialogue after this workshop around, are we going to see an increase in work in prosecutions? Are we going to say, ask the court for a whole afternoon of prosecution court work, which means key officers are in the same building at the same time, and we maximise the resource that we've got available? So I'm quite happy, Chair, on behalf of Legal Services, to put that forward, and perhaps both Councillor Mahmood, Darren's team, Paul's team as well, and Legal Services, when I've got it in a slightly better shape, around what we can do to improve things, and obviously listen to Barking and Dagenham, if that assists.
Thanks, Jenny, for the clarification. But the general feeling within the committee is, over the last 6 months, we've done a lot of work with other local authorities like Wigan, Nottingham, and Derbyshire. And this must be having the same requirements when it comes to the legal requirements. And this seems to be a lot more active in terms of prosecutions and issuing the tickets. And there's a general feeling that, we are too lenient on those, and we can understand.
Absolutely, not too lenient.
I think it will be useful, if you can send an email, a summary to the committee of what your department can support with the work that we are doing on tackling fly tipping and getting our streets cleaner, and what can your department do and what they can't do. I think that'll be useful.
I can do that, Chair. There's a lot about consistency of what is the case file look like.
there's an issue of timeliness as well, because there was also a very limited time frame in order to do a prosecution for failure to pay fixed terms of notice, for example. So this is the more time that we have in legal services, the more that we've got a chance to put the case together, get it into court, and we're not so last minute. Some of the prosecutions may be out of time by the time we get them.
So that's why I think that there just needs to be a workshop, just a different sort of time-out session, and let's look at things going forward collaboratively. I don't think it's anyone's fault in either department. I think it's likely a conversation. I think it's like a time for me and Darren spend together going, what does it take for example, and just look at it with a sort of fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah, quickly.
Can I just add? We are on the right. I think all of us have got similar views in terms of where we want to get to in the end. And the legal officers explained that we will be holding a workshop and try to get all the heads around the position we want to get to. But just have a look at the figures also. So in 2021 to 2022, there was 37 commercial waste there at the end. And since I've been in post, there's been 152. So that's an increase of 115 in terms of what we've done in the last year. So we are on the right track. And I agree with Councillor in terms of public interest. I do think the public will want us to not serious to vote now do any types of recycling, because we've now made it possible for people to dispose and recycle of their household items. There should be no reason whatsoever for anyone to flight it. We've introduced free bottle collection for those on assisted collection as well. So everyone has access to disposing of their waste. But the report will come back and we'll speak about it and I will get involved. I've Googled who the answers I do actually know, so I will get in touch with them and we'll get the ball rolling as that. We'll all come back. But we are going to increase the momentum that we've built over the last year. We had 152 FPNs issued, and we'll probably try to get more than that issued in the next municipal year as well.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm mindful of time, so Councillor Rainbow.
I know Councillor Bridle mentioned it earlier in terms of the housing sort of overlap, and I know certainly we have it in my ward of Quinton where, we have great initiatives like Love Your Environment Day, but we know that a lot of the fly tipping spots are in housing land. Is any more work being done around that really? And I suppose just as a quick point, just on the Ground Watch, I know others have sort of already talked about this, but you mentioned it being picked up by Birmingham Live. Obviously a wonderful local publication. However, more people obviously watch broadcast media than they do print media. So will you be doing any more with sort of Midlands Today, ITV Central, those types of organisations, as opposed to just relying on print?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rainbow. You're absolutely right. A lot of the fly tipping that does take place is on housing land, and currently it doesn't come within my area of responsibility. But what we have done with the Love Your Environment, that's an all-out approach. So we will actually pick up any items which are on housing land. And I haven't actually looked at the figures completely, see, because the officers don't, they take analysis of all the data we get, so how many fridges they pick up, tables, etc., whatever we pick up, but we don't actually separate it to housing land, this many items, The good news is that there is an ongoing discussion with housing, try to basically bring it back to the depots that we are responsible to take up any of the flights in the housing. And I do think that officers, both from housing and from policing, are basically feeling very positive about that, because the last thing we want residents to see is if you reported a flighted fridge on highway land or in a park, and then across the piece you've got housing land and you've reported a table. At the same time, you reported both, but then one gets picked up a lot quicker than the other one gets picked up. It should be picked up at the same time. Also, in terms of resources, it's better for us, even in reduction of carbon emissions, have the one truck come down and pick up items from both pieces of land. But there is ongoing discussion, find the points that the officers are basically they're trying to get signed off. But it's something that I'm in favour of also. The Government for Housing is also in favour of, both of us are in favour of having that approach going forward. In terms of Ground Watch, the press release is always done by City Council, as you're aware, and we hope as many media outlets pick it up as well. But I think we do need to be more proactive in extending that to more. That's why I'm having a look at the Asian media as well, because they can capture an audience that we haven't previously captured. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to build on what the Cabinet Member was saying as well, just to sort of let you know, perhaps a bit of a good news story. We've been working closely with housing that came to us over an issue where they had a piece of vans that was continually tipped. and we've realised that there are some really good cross-working things that we can do. After that, we have actually seized the vehicle and will be submitting a prosecution report for the individual involved who flighted to the location. That has, as I say, led to further conversations with housing to build on that as well, although we find us inside. We've also got some meetings scheduled with some registered social landlords, so some housing associations, where we can have conversations about how we can each benefit each other with regards to land that they own and also tipping from their tenancy if it's offered them.
Well, quickly, cabinet member, in terms of CCTV cameras, you know, Alumrock is one of the hotspots, although we made huge progress in the last 12 months. But still, there's a need for having a CCTV camera in Alumrock ward.
Yeah, Alumrock continuously comes up as one of the wards with the most vital reporting. Whenever we have a Love Your Environment Day in Alumrock, it comes up with the greatest number of statistics as well in terms of the items that we pick. But one thing we have noticed is the number of complaints for fly tipping has significantly reduced. In Alumrock, since we've introduced Love Your Environment, that's across the country as well. Then the CCTV, as I said, the requests come through to fly tipping at .gov.uk. The officers carry out the intelligence and then they'll allocate the resources as and where they need. I mean, there's a good example actually in your ward in Alumrock. There's a pharmacy down there. It's been in the press. That pharmacy, they name and shame any people that steal products from the pharmacy. And in the article, it mentions that the owner has said that on a number of occasions, the culprits have come back, apologising to pay for the goods that they've taken, or family members or other members have come. So CCTV, not just CCTV, needs to be more than this. Now, I'm looking at some form of name and shame gap. That's something that we could also operate here. It's worked in my ward. I'm quite blessed in my ward. I've got split. Someone who worked for a taxi company lighted the mattress, although his partner with him, she did actually put the crisp back into the bin, which is very good for her, but they lighted the mattress. That footage was given to me, and I put that on social media and he was working for the taxi on the spot. I said that would message to very significant.
Cabinet member, we have to move to the next item. Some questions? Agenda item 6 is cleaner streets, and we got cabinet member again and Aaron Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, anybody, you know.
Is it flight tipping? Second one.
Cleaner
Which
streets.
side? Recommendation. Okay, yeah, I can take you through this. Okay, recommendation 1, I've spoken about this before in terms of dialogue with members, the depot visits, the Love Your Streets. And Love Your Streets is the department that we have where we really want members to. That's where you can have visiting groups engaging, you can have traders, if you've got people in your ward, engage with them to tackle the deep-rooted problems that you have in your ward. Love Your Environment is the day, the one-off day where we have the whole street depot and parks coming to basically give a good clean-up of the ward as well. Those are now notified to members as well, so you'll see it in red. When the officer sends you the location of your mobile household recycling centre, he'll also send you in red that there's going to be a Love Your Environment on that day. And if there's any specific issues you need dealt with also on that day, which aren't deep-rooted, but you've got, about 3-4 fridges which you've reported, they'll get picked up on that day as well. That's recommendation 1. Depot visits have taken place. Those members that haven't had the opportunity of the depot visit, we are going to put on some more depot visits going forward, because Atlas Works now is operational. We'll be opening we'll have the opening 1-2 streets and get the depot now amalgamated. We will learn about the 4 depot members who are served by Atlas Works depot as well, depot as well. So you can also get streets. Get any council in the interim? I know we've got a few requests having the street teams there. We're working on them. It's just that the paper, the documents are that big, it's hard to get them onto an email for you, but we are working on that for you. And there'll be another survey actually, just to put you on notice. There will be another survey in terms of the reviewing the mobile centres again. Just with some questions around your advertisement, the amount of interest you take. Because now what we've also done, and this will help members as well, because we'll produce a report for all of you in your wards. The crews take note of the number of visits to the mobile household recycling centre as well. So we'll know how many people have attended. And then we'll also have the tonnage. Because I found out sometimes in some wards, the crews are coming back saying, oh, there was only a handful of people that have attended. But when they've tipped the truck, there's like 4 tons have come out. And that's because those few people have bought in a lot of items. It's not really what we really want is everyone to engage with the mobile truck. So that will be coming, survey to all members. Then I'll review the allocation again of where the truck should be. So if you've performed well and you've had lots of visits to your truck, then you've got a good argument to have more trucks being issued. 2 bank holidays, we've got 2 crews working as well in May, and we're still looking at having some sort of operation on Saturdays and afternoon visits as well. So that's work in progress. Again, it's back to the feedback from members, and that's the feedback I've had in terms of what you're wanting us to do. Recommendation 2, that's the new litter prevention strategy. That's now been worked on. We've got some help from Keep Britain Tidy. The good news is you've probably seen on my tweets, they're letting us use the logo, the hashtag Keep Britain Tidy. So whenever you do advertise watch episodes or you've got a mobile truck in your ward, they'd always use the hashtag Keep Britain Tidy because I think it captures people as well. It's a lot better than recommendation 3. That's about the workforce and involvement with officers. The plan is, and Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, is for each ward, and this picks up the point of driving, each ward will be allocated managers to be allocated to contact for your specific ward. So if you have any issues, you've got direct to that ward, that office, and they'll be managing your ward for you. And again, that will also encourage you to have your walkabouts with your managers and your wards. But recommendation 4, again, we're working with Keep It Tidy. Tax and chewing gum was successful. That's why we put in another bid, like so as well, who were collaborating with us on that bid, making system that we include as well. So there's also new procurement around the waste disposal. One of the things that I have looked at is responsibility resources to include council reporting around waste prevention as well. Recommendation 5 that we've just spoken about, as Councillor Rain was question about handling, that will be hopefully adopted within street scene. So we'll have more of a one council approach. We've already got the evidence. We love your environment. It's working really, really well. Recommendation 6 around culture change. In fact, we did actually have a very positive article around street cleaning for the cleanliness on Coventry Road 2 weeks ago, because you've got the unofficial Ramadan markets taking place there, but the teams have been absolutely amazing for cleanliness on that control. I've had numerous emails, and I've been the chief executive William Mosque, which is the largest mosque there. They're actually going to write him to lead from the chief executive and the team for the work that they've been doing. And second, obviously, we need to have a conversation of moving the markets away from control and making that more official. Recommendation 7, that's self-explanatory. There has been significant improvement in joint working. We've got the neighbourhood action coordinators, who I believe are going to be next in this meeting. So that's working really well. The relationship between street scene, parks, and the neighbourhood action coordinators. There's 20 new CCTV we've ordered, and there's going to be an increase in ward-based neighbourhood officer. Again, just another point of providing around organisation for the wards. Recommendation 8. This was the difficult one. This was the difficult for myself because finances are strained in terms of street scene. But we have invested in the district £200,000. That's been invested, and I think most, if not all, the councillors know what their group have been their ward has benefited from that. It's a big improvement. Again, if you've got any new groups that's setting up, even if you've got individuals, let us know. We can propose to that equipment for you. There's also a which will go into when we more basic to support external application in parts of the parks. Recommendation 9, but really fast for the mind, but also fast, so that's quite surprising. So recommendation 9, as I've said earlier, we have Love Your Environment taking place every day now, Monday to Friday, across the city. The top 15 wards being tackled once a month. And going forward, we're going to review that because we'll use the date of July to budget these stats, because there has been some movements in terms of the reported items wards. That top 15 wards may change, so we'll add Love Your Environment in those wards. I always email the elected members once the event is taking place with these statistics, and it would be good actually to also place. I know some members do put it onto their social media. Good if you Partly because of the Love Your Environment and the Love Your Street, we have seen a reduction in fly tipping across the city. Again, it's helped for all of us. Recommendation 10, this is about the graffiti, and we certainly support James. I was going to ask the question, but he's gone. So we do need permission to remove graffiti from the landowner. But what we have done is we brought in a disclaimer, which becomes ongoing disclaimer. So if we remove the graffiti once, then we don't need to go back to the landowner again to remove it again. I'm sure that'll be tested at some point going forward. Recommendation 11. Around advertising of where people can recycle and dispose of their household items. Peribar is still not operational, will be operational by the summer, so that once that's brought back in, then we could do some marketing around Peribar reopening. We are advertising the mobile household recycling centres. I do that on a daily basis, Monday to Friday. I know members, when I tag them in, do tend to retweet. There's a cross-party effort. Thank you, members opposite for their support in terms of mobile household recycling. We are looking to expand them, as I've said before, to weekends and afternoons. We also working with the because we want to increase the recycling as well, because unfortunately at this moment in time, trucks are only picking up 10% of recycling items and 90% of it is effectively been used as tip trucks. I know one member uses that to advertise in their social media. So some work needs to be done in terms of recycling trucks. For example, green waste, a lot of the items that are brought in from green waste. This moment in time, unfortunately, that's not been recycled, but we do need to have a mechanism in place, but that's recycled. So we're looking into that in terms of what options we've got going forward. Then recommendation 12, I flagged this up when I first came into the portfolio many years ago, and it's still not been done, but it's now been worked on. So you will have a list of the big assets in your awards, and then you can work with them to ensure that they've got the assets. Just before 3 o'clock, I have questions.
Next member, Councillor Dryden.
Yeah, I mean, I think we made some progress on this, which is good. We obviously heard a load of councils talking about what they do, and it was really interesting, as was the fly tipping inquiry. And I think, you know, it's good to see that you are taking on board some of the suggestions that this scrutiny committee has made. I visited the depot, interesting experience. I think it would be helpful, Darren, if you could send out calendar to every councillor for, you know, whatever the next sessions are. I don't think those were sent round, but it would be helpful to have that thing in calendar electronic diaries. I think the test will be introducing local first. You know, we do need somebody to talk to. I have kind of pinned down who I think my person is, but I didn't realise until I got to the depot that the guys and women who work there work on the basis of the old wards. So my ward is made up of the old Washwood Heath ward, the old Stetchford and Yardley North ward, and the old Shard End ward. So, of course, I've got some information about Ian Ward's ward, and I've got, I didn't get the information on Stetchford and Yardley North ward. I had to ask for that. That wasn't in the pack. So it's a bit complicated because it's old ward base. I don't know whether, you know, we don't restructure or anything, because that's just going to take too much time, but we just need to get on with it really. But anyway, that was interesting. So it'd be helpful to know who the ward person is, because certainly the men are working across all these old wards, so you don't quite know who your person is. I think I figured that one, but anyway. That was that one. On the litter prevention strategy, I think it would be really helpful if we can have one of those sessions, Darren, where you get all councillors together and maybe you do a bit of a workshop for anyone who's interested on the litter prevention strategy. I think that'd be something that we could all, you know, take an interest in and hopefully help with. At that point, the next point I wanted to make was about the anti-littering campaigns. You've said something about chewing gum, which is good. I don't think there has been as much chewing gum around, so maybe we're having some success with that. But anyway, or maybe people aren't using it anymore. Anti-litter campaigns. I mean, I want to see what sort of messaging we're talking about here. Can you give us some examples, Darren, of what you mean and how we're going to be involved in messages out? Because that's what we were saying it was needed. The one council approach, I do have to say that when I was at the depot, I did ask about Love Your Environment and housing. And I was specifically told by people there that the Love Your Environment days did not involve housing. Did not involve housing land and did not involve housing. Now, I was told that, so either they've got it wrong or you've got it wrong, but, you know, can you give us a definitive on that? Because obviously it's madness if housing aren't involved. That means a lot of land in my ward wouldn't be touched because I've got a lot of council housing still. And then again, you know, it'd be useful to know what impact. I mean, we're getting some information later about the neighbourhood action coordinators and what impact they're making, which is good. These environmental enforcement officers, are we all going to get them? And, you know, what kind of impact are they making? Again, it would be useful to know. So I think those were my main points, really. I assume you're saying charities like the Ladywood Furniture Project are going to appear on our website so that we can start promoting that you don't have to dump your rubbish, you can use a charity to collect. So it looks like there are that's going to do. Right, thank you. So, yeah. Some answers to the points I've made, maybe from Darren, including confirmation of the calendar invites.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I've just spoken to Darren and the invitation was sent by email, but I think in future they need to send by calendar invites.
Yes.
They're automated onto elected members' calendars, so they're made aware when the actual date is. Technically, you've got like one of the largest wards in terms of footspan in the city, so it encompasses a lot of the former wards, so it's quite tricky to navigate, but you will be getting an officer for your ward, so every elected member will have an officer. It would be your point of contact for your new board in terms of, because once now how this works is operational, lots of changes that we're making, because the wards are going to be incorporated in new constituencies on July this year. And even the police are working with your wards, that's housing in the depots. Housing, obviously, in Bromford and Hodgett, I have lots of housing land, and Love Your Environment does include housing and most of, in fact, all of Bromford versus housing and except the library, and the items are picked up. So we just need to double check with the depot managers that they've all got the same memo that was sent around initially, which was if you see it, you pick it. That's it. Simple as that. You just pick it up whenever you see it, and just put the date in as well. I'm with you. We want to get invested in class in Birmingham, and if that means we have to learn from smaller councils across the country. So I'm a lawyer by profession. I believe in CPD. I'm a fan of continuous professional development, and I think that's part of what the learning exercise is here with ourselves within street scene. And we have got to a place now where we're getting positive articles in the local press, and we're getting lots of emails now from people actually thanking us for the work that's been done in terms of the mobile trucks, in terms of the Love Your Environment, in terms of even visibly seeing officers on the ground. Working with yourselves, and I think since I've been a cabinet member, this might be probably fourth year now. I don't think I've been attending so many scrutiny meetings in the whole year. So that's thanks to all the members here. So for your input, and for us as well, it's a learning exercise. I really agree with the local person. It's always good because we water our person we need to talk to. Otherwise, all that people are getting emails. But what I can tell you, based on the evidence I have in terms of my inbox, in terms of what I used to get when I was in this post a few years back, it's minimal in terms of complaints around fly tipping, in terms of complaints around refuse collection, even parks as well. It's minimal compared to, so we are on the right direction. Working all of us collectively, cross-party, and I'm grateful for the support we get from members of the members, party and concerns. And if I was to do a tally and based on proportion of visitors attending the mobile house or recycling truck and the tonnage, I actually think that the Conservative group would probably lead, but I need to analyse the figures in more detail. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, member. Councillor Goodwin.
Yes.
Councillor Goodwin, and then Councillor Khan, and then Councillor.
I'll just miss that on the litter picking strategy. Part of what we're going to do was to have a workshop anyway with elected members, with RAP, with Keeper and Tidy, and we're going to invite litter picking groups as well. that conversation, because I think that the best way to tackle it is to work collectively across the city, and then I went down to the question on the.
Just a couple of observations, I suppose, and some balance to all this. I do feel incredibly frustrated that we're not making as much headway as we could do about the fixed penalty notice. And I think, I've said that. But on the other side of that, I have to say, the MHR, the two things that I think have been a real. I've met this service manager very well, and that would be absolutely brilliant. He must be fed up of me ringing him at 7:30 in the morning, saying, "That's me again, all these roads are missed." But in all honesty, he's come out, he's been out and had a look and I can see where the problem is now. I can get that sorted, and that's been absolutely great. I've got to say so. If you see Bob, say thank you, because I think that's been really good. And the other bit's the MHRC, and I've got to say, I mean, Councillor Mahmood came out last week to see what we were up to, and it was really, really pleasing. I didn't know we planned it, but the people trying to get onto the car park where the MHRC was, it was heaving, and that was good. That was really, really good. So a bit of work on telling people it's there, and a bit of kind of saying that this is what you can do. It was great. So thank you, and can I have some more, please?
Thank you for that. Thank you. I was coming to Cascade and the officers that we referred to. The ringing officers, when I was in Turkey a few weeks back on the charter trip, I was ringing officers 8 o'clock. I do here as well. The officers in the desk is actually brilliant because
They are.
Yeah, early morning calls, they then take a lot more than the afternoon calls. Yeah, we'll pass them comments to the officers.
I'm mindful of time, and can you be brief? Okay.
Just a quick one in regards to cleaning street schedule. I requested that in May last year. It's been a year. I know Councillor I've emailed him on many occasions. I've still not had any. Every week I get emails from residents in my ward of Smallheath saying to me that they've had council officers come out, they've cleaned half of the road and they just disappeared. So if you guys could just let us know by when we'd be able to have like a schedule of our ward so that we could obviously monitor this, if the cleaning is actually happening and the roads are getting cleaned.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Khan, for that. It wasn't May of last year, it was September last year. But the depot visits were there.
No, I emailed you in May and June. When I got elected, I started getting emails, so then I started emailing you and other officers, but up until now, I've not had any.
The last email that I was copied into, I remember, was in that.
All you told me was.
We did say to you that we would invite you to the depot for a visit. I don't think you took up that invitation.
I was one of
Can I intervene, please? Can you order this meeting, deal with this matter also, this meeting?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harmer.
Could I support a comment made by Councillor Bridle about sending calendar invites? I am pretty sure I did not get an email telling me about the day at Redfern because Councillor Jenkins, I think it was, sent me her email, and I looked back and I didn't get any emails around time. Now, it's possible there were batches of emails and it was sent out at a different time and I missed it. So all these things are possible. But if you had a calendar invite, you'd know it was happening. But having said that, our Neighbourhood Action Coordinator did go to it. And based on the report, it may not have actually missed a lot, in the sense that when we went in 2017, which the report refers to, what happened was that the 3 councillors for my ward, it was Councillor O'Shea, Councillor Stacey and myself at the time, sat down and we looked at the map and we talked with the managers about these are issues, that area is a problem, can we up it there, maybe reduce it there, and actually get on top of problems like that. And it was a good discussion. And I gather, towards the meeting, that we didn't sort of get into those sorts of details. So I would like a visit where we can actually focus on quite a granular level on the specific problems. Just as one example to illustrate why it's important to have that discussion. There's a brick crushing yard in my ward, and what happens is when the full lorries turn out onto the Yardley Road, occasionally one is overloaded and you get brick fines spilling out on the pavement. And I've got a residence, and it's over quite a short period, probably about 100 yards that these brick fines come out. And when it rains, it turns the pavement into this sort of slippery, mushy, sort of goo that's on the pavement. So there's a resident there who about once a month says they haven't swept the pavement again. And I put in an inquiry and I say, please can you clear it? And please can this section be mechanically swept on a regular basis to deal with the problem as he rectifies? And it's never done. And it's almost like, oh, I'm back. Please can you get it done? And it's that sort of detail. Look, just this little bit needs mechanical sweepers to go down once a month or whatever, that we need to get into to knock out those problems, which, we've all got them around our wall. If we knock out those problems and not have to keep going back with them, our lives will get a lot easier. But much more importantly, you'd be able to focus on, more underlying problems rather than just repeating the same thing again and again and again. That's the main point I wanted to make. Just on we've had some Love Your Street sessions, and they are good. One sort of bit of feedback is that the last Love Your Street session that we had, actually a lot of the work that was done on that was clearing up leaf mould that hadn't been cleared up in the leaf collection process. So we need to get leaf collection better next winter so that we're not using up a lot of Love Your Streets resources doing what actually is just basic work of clearing up leaves. Thank you.
Very quick.
I'll be quick. We're going to send calendar invites now going forward. The intention of the depot was for elected members to go through what I experienced myself in 2017. So what I might do is I might offer to all elected members who want to go through their street cleaning schedule to have a meeting here in the council house, and we can bring the depot managers here or the ASMs, and like Councillor Khan can have a look at his street schedule as well. So I'll offer that to both yourselves. In fact, we'll offer it to all members if they want to. If they feel they've missed out on the opportunity previously, we'll give them an opportunity here in the council. It's a lot easier for me to arrange in the council as than it is at the depot, so we'll do that. And if you've got any laser-like focused approach that you need in terms of cleanliness of particular roads because the leaves have got mush and so that the Love Your Streets can come into, so I'll give you the contact for Celine and we can arrange that to ensure that happens. Going forward, lessons have been learned around the leaves. Climate change has played a part in it, but it's played a part in what happened this year, so lessons that relevance going forward will be in a better place to ensure that doesn't happen. Thanks, Madam.
And quickly.
It's okay, it's already on.
All right then. Thanks very much. We'll have to move on to the agenda item 7, which is localization progress update on neighborhood action coordination program. Before that, I'll ask the leader to give us an wider overview of the localization agenda. Leader, yeah.
Sorry, could you say that again? I missed that.
Localization, the wider localization agenda.
Okay, could I pass these notes around? I know I've circulated a report that's in the agenda, but it'd be helpful if those were circulated as well. And the reason will become apparent. Obviously, we have been pursuing a renewed localisation agenda for a number of years now. And I know there has been some criticism that we are not devolving the kind of funding that gets devolved in other cities and towns, in particular core cities. So we've very recently had a look at what the financial position is for devolved funding, and that is set out in this paper that I've just circulated. If you look on the top of page 2, you'll see there's a table, and that sets out all of the localised funds that we have here in Birmingham, and it includes the penultimate line is the staffing resource for the neighbourhood network service, which is also included in these figures. The one line that skews the number a little bit is the community, the SILT money, the local community infrastructure levy, because you'll see that's just short £2.8 million. But when you break that down, the overwhelming majority of that money, I think it's £1.5 million, is actually in Ladywood, because that's where SIL is actually levied and where there is a lot of development going on. So if you exclude that number, you'll see that in Birmingham, we are just a fraction short of £11 million of devolved spending that is determined in the wards around the city. And then beneath that table is a comparison with other core cities. So if you look at Manchester, they've devolved just £20,000 per ward per year. Newcastle, if you remember, in Newcastle, in a 2-member ward, you receive £5,625. In a 3-member ward, £7,500. And then at the foot of page 3, you'll see there's another table, which is a comparison. So that's got the full 13.6 million in it. But even if you took out the 2.7, you can see that the budgets in Birmingham are far higher than other core cities, and the spend per head is also higher in Birmingham than other core cities. So I think we have made some significant progress in devolving funding in Birmingham. And in the budget that we set for 23-24, there is further amounts of devolved funding. So I'll just run through with you now where we are with this, because I will be sending out a note. I'd hoped to do it before we got into April, but there's been 1 or 2 problems with it. But I will be sending out a note to all members of the council next week that will set out the various funding that's available for each and every ward across the city, which consists of community chest, which is a sum of either 10 or 20 one or a 2-member ward. There is the housing capital environmental works. That money comes out towards via housing liaison boards, because it is housing environmental money, and its spend is determined by the HLBs in consultation with elected members. There's then the minor transport measures budget, again 10 or 20k, depending on whether you're a 1 or 2-member ward, and you'll all be aware that that has to be spent in line with strings attached by the Transport Department. Still, I've already mentioned the majority of that only applies to Ladywood. There's the newly announced Clean Air Fund, or the Brum Breeds Fund, which is £20,000 for a single-member ward and 40 for a 2-member ward. Then there is the Celebrating Communities Fund. Now, this is a legacy from the Commonwealth Games. You'll recall that last year we devolved a sum of £2 million to all wards in order to connect all of our communities into the Commonwealth Games. We will be repeating that this year and in years going forward, because one of the legacies from the Commonwealth Games is the creation of a cultural festival, which will take place here in the city centre. So last week of July, first week of August. It is a reprise, really, of what we did during the Commonwealth Games. That funding is devolved, but it has deprivation factored into it. So the numbers will vary ward to ward, depending on the level of deprivation. But it is, again, a budget of £2 million. There is some money top sliced from that figure for admin and staffing support, but it is, by and large, what you all would have received 12 months ago. There's a little bit of time pressure on that, obviously getting it committed in time for this event that's taking place at the end of July, but I'll come back to that in a second. There's then the Neighbourhood Action Coordinators. They are currently active in 22 wards across the city, and if you're fortunate enough to have one, it comes with a £10,000 budget, and there's a process for determining the spend of that. The next line then is the staffing that supports all of the ward forum meetings. And then finally, the Section 106 money. If you've had housing developments in your ward, you will no doubt have some Section 106 money that you'll be talking to planners about how that gets spent. All of that adds up, as I've said, to more or less £11 million that we've got devolved going forward. Along with the numbers that will come out next week, I'll also be setting out some governance around the spend of this. So in order to devolve any of this money, it will be a requirement of a ward that they have a ward plan in place. There's a number of wards currently who do not have a ward plan in place. And secondly, in order to request any spend, it will require a formal minute of a ward forum meeting. That is all, with the exception, the full minute will be required, but the ward plan requirement, the exception to that is the Celebrating Communities Fund, because I appreciate wards that do not have a ward plan currently in place are going to struggle to achieve that and then spend this money to connect their communities into the festival we're creating. So that fund this year, ward members will be able to tap into without having a ward plan in place, but in future years it will be a requirement that there's a ward plan in place. So I'm happy, Chair, to take any questions on that. Then what we're going to do, I've mentioned the neighbourhood action coordinators. Karen Cheney, who's sat at the end of this table, is going to give a presentation on what I believe to be the success of these neighbourhood action coordinators over the time we've had them out, because we are about to carry out a review of neighbourhood action coordinators, how successful they've been. I have one in Shard End. I think it's been a great success. If the review agrees with what I've just said, then these neighbourhood action coordinators will be rolled out across all of the wards right across the city. There's budget provision within this year's budget to do that. So we'll have this presentation, and then I'll finally say something about a scheme that they've got operating in the city of Nottingham, which I'm keen to go and have a look at, and which we will look to see if we could recreate something similar here in Birmingham, and there will be some people coming with me to Nottingham to have a look at that later this year. So first of all, I'll take any questions on what I've said about the funding, then we'll ask Karen to give this presentation.
Thank you, Leader. Any questions? Councillor Bridle and Councillor Harmer.
Yes, I think we're making progress, which is fantastic. So I'm sure most of us feel quite pleased. Well, certainly those of us with neighbourhood action coordinators seen the difference that can make, that post can make. I would say, I think I had a chat with my yesterday, doing something today, as we mostly are, that I think 2.5 days a week is about right, really. So I think to share with another ward is probably a good idea. It seems to work. It'd be interesting to hear what the neighbourhood action coordinator themselves say. But I think we're making progress. But this is Council Ward, a transformational programme for the council. So it's not an easy thing to.
Thank you for recognising.
But I think it is a transformational programme, and we do have to get everybody on board. And I note that in the presentation that put together for us, that it clearly says that some of our officers, I mean, we've all sort of said, I think, that it would be useful to have ward contacts, a team of people that you can get to know. And we've kind of struggled with this over a number of years. They were called relationship managers, I think, to start with, and then they were called service contacts. I think you call them not silos, but it's silos, isn't it? Something like that now. The name keeps changing. But these people, we still need those ward names, that ward team that we can get to know. And those people need to understand what this is all about. And that means, Councillor Ward, in my view, the directors, the people at the top, have to say to their officers, this is what this council is about. We are about transforming the local working that we're doing. A la, what's he called, Graham Betts, Mr. Betts, who has done that, or is trying to do it in adult social care with great success, I think. So the early intervention and prevention are kind of mantra, which is, crucial to what this council should be about. Will only happen if we're all helping with that on the ground. And that's what I think that director has understood, that that's the way forward. So I think all directors have to be on board with this. And, I'm looking to you, Ian, to make this happen. And then hopefully the officer team that we all work with will understand what their role is, and that they will not say to us, I'm still getting, I'm afraid, that they don't understand that this is a creative process at local level, working with residents. It's not just about necessarily knowing exactly what you're doing with your service and saying that this isn't anything to do with me. It's that's somebody else. It's Kia rather than the highways engineer. Sometimes you need all those people together to think creatively with local residents groups about ways forward to deal with different projects or issues that you've got in your ward plan. That is not happening, and I think the officers are right to pinpoint that. one of the things that we need to try and do, really get to grips with, and it has to come from the leadership. So I'm glad you're on board, and hopefully you're going to make this happen for us. And the other point, it's good to see the money coming through. But I think I've already said to you that it would be useful to be able to cross-fertilise money. And, I know some of my residents groups have asked whether that's going to be possible to use, say, £2,000 from one pot and then £2,000 from another and put it together to make a bigger sum of money. And I just wondered if you could just explain or reassure me that that can happen. And the trouble is with all these different application forms and things that you're filling in, how's that going to work? And if we could maybe, whether we could agree all of it through the ward forum and do it like that. But I think that needs a bit more thought really about how that can happen.
Not £4,000 of them, because you wouldn't need to take one bit from one pot and one bit from another pot, would you? £4,000.
Well, it depends really. It depends on how many groups of people you're working with in your ward.
All of this money comes with certain strings attached, and that's obviously to protect both the public purse and the elected members making these requests for spend. But there is no reason, if you take, let's say, the Clean Air Fund, that has to be spent on things in line with the transport plan and on things that will encourage active commuting or public transport. There's no reason why you couldn't put community chest together with that if you were, abiding by the strings that are attached to the Clean Air Fund. So as long as you're not going outside any of the tram lines, if I describe it like that are set for each of these particular pots of funding, there's no reason why you couldn't put funding together. Indeed, currently, what happens is money currently gets rolled over from one financial year to another if people have a large project that they've wanted to spend money on. I don't see any reason why there couldn't be some flexibility around that as well. I agree with your comments about 2.5 days a week seems about right. If you go back to the days when we had ward support officers, they were in 3-member wards, 5 days a week. This is split between a 1 and a 2-member ward, so it's probably on the same basis there or thereabouts. And whilst I agree with you that there is a creative process and councillors need to be willing to work with officers and get involved in how things are influenced at a ward level, what I think we've got to do some more work on is if there are to be local contacts, how that is going to work without undermining the data collection in the contact centre. If you recall now, all requests for or complaints or requests for service go through the customer call centre because the data is then collected in order to carry out a root cause analysis in order that we can try to close off some of these recurrent problems in different geographies around the city. So I think we need to do some work about not how we would make this work in terms of local contact without undermining the process in the contact centre.
If I could just quickly come back on the sort of the corporate leadership team piece. So there was, as part of a corporate leadership team meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, a workshop discussion around place-based activity and local working. So I think there is, an increased appetite to understand how we work better on, at a localized setting, and that will be thought through, I think, over the coming weeks and months. So I think it is now really high up the agenda amongst the very senior officer structure as well.
Councillor Harmer?
Thank you. Yeah, I do very much welcome many of the recent initiatives that have been launched in this area. My ward has a good action coordinator, and I would agree with a lot of things that Councillor Bridle has said. It's something that described in a slightly different way, but my group's been calling for a long time, and I very much welcome that we have that resource. And so far, it is early days, but so far so good. I sort of feel on the handout that we've just been given, there is a little bit of spin in this, in that, for example, I've only had a few minutes to look at it, but you can look at, for example, if you look at Leeds, you can see their 3 million is wellbeing and youth funds together is 3 million, and that's what's in the table. They also have various community committees, well, we've thrown in the cost of running all our neighbourhood forums, and that's not in the Leeds. Sure, there is a cost to running all those committees in Leeds that, if you're doing it on a like-for-like basis, ought to be in that figure. But, that aside, those sorts of issues aside, we have got, much more local funding than we used to have, and that is welcome. There are issues with some of the bits of funding, which Marge alluded to an extent. So, for example, if you go through, you've got the list here. The ones on the spade note, the ones that we've actually had in my ward last year, or the financial year has just ended, would be the Housing, Capital, Environmental Works, the Minor Transport Works, and Celebrating Communities Fund. So that's Section 106, but that's not listed out in terms of funding. But of the ones above Section 106, we've had those three. Obviously, we'll get more in the current year. But of those three, we actually haven't had any minor transport work money spent because there hasn't been the capacity in the Highways Department to actually work up schemes. We've had meetings with them to talk about what we'd like, but they haven't had the capacity to actually work them up into projects. And I actually spoke to our highways engineer this morning, and yeah, fine, the money will be rolled over to this year, and no doubt we should get it spent this year. The housing, capital, environmental works, that hasn't all been spent because of problems, in the supply chain, getting quotes from suppliers and all. So the bureaucracy to make that work hasn't actually delivered the funding that's available. And the Celebrating Communities Fund, again, there were issues in terms of getting bids in there that met all the criteria. And we're now finding that with the Neighbourhood Action Coordination £10,000, getting members of the community to volunteer onto the panel who aren't involved in any of the bids or linked with any of the bids actually becomes quite a problem. Or, it then becomes a job to go out. I'm sure, by putting time and effort into it, we could go and find them, but that's diverting time and effort away from other things. That seems a bit of an odd thing to have to do when you're just talking about £10,000. So we need to try and make sure that when you're dividing it up into a number of different funds from a number of different places, that they are actually reasonably streamlined, and we don't get caught up in a whole set of varying bureaucracies for the different funds that collectively becomes quite a piece. But I'll park that and say, I do welcome this as a significant move in the right direction. And I'm very glad that it's happening, and I particularly welcome the Neighbourhood Action Coordinators. Thank you.
Well, that's useful feedback, actually, because I don't see this as set in stone going forward. I think this is an agenda that will evolve, and as we get more feedback on the experience out in the wards, some of these strings that are attached to the funding may alter, and indeed some of the processes that we've currently got in place may well change. I wasn't aware that there was a capacity problem around highway schemes, or indeed that there's a problem spending the housing, capital, environmental works money, because I haven't experienced those problems myself in Shard Ward. But it's useful to hear it.
Thanks, Leader Karen.
Just one point, I haven't got the paper in front of me, but if it's the same one as before, just clarification. The one that's at the end is for neighbourhood network schemes. That's the adult and social care 50+ work, not the admin support for neighbourhood forums.
Just so that was my mistake.
Just so people don't go away and think, my God, it's cost £4 million quick. It doesn't. That's the neighbourhood network scheme.
Understood. That's fine.
If there's no more question, then I'll introduce Edmund Crosher-Markwell to go through the Neighbourhood Action Coordination Pilot and support him. Okay, you want to say something? Yeah.
So, NED for short. I'm sure everybody knows it, NED for short. So in terms of the reports, you've got a report, but what we're going to concentrate on is the presentation, because I think that's the bit that visually is the stuff that you want to see, which is how the Neighbourhood Action Coordination Pilot is going and some of the results and learning from it. And you'll be pleased to know it won't be me going through it. It will be Ned. And Ned is the Community Support and Development Officer within NDSU, whose thematic responsibility is the Neighbourhood Action coordination program.
Thanks, Karen. I believe there is a lot of slides, and instead of going all through, if you can just summarize the main ones. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. With your permission, I'm not going to share the presentation up on the screen, just because with the amount of text on it, I think it would be not actually very useful. So I'll talk you through it. You've got the documents in the agenda pack. So the Neighbourhood Action Coordination role is there to work with elected members, stakeholders, community organisations, active citizens, and council services to help coordinate action and unlock it on the ground in response to kind of priority issues for local areas. If we go to page 2, the main themes that we're working under, it's just worth highlighting, is the sort of local street scene, community safety, and deprivation quality of life. And this all kind of sits under that sort of main environmental place-based kind of approach. In terms on page 3, in terms of the recruitment, we have got all coordinators in place, and I just think it would be worth just highlighting that we have got an alternative model in Billesley Wards and Brandwood and Kings Heath Ward, where we have commissioned a community anchor organisation, just as a compare and contrast model to see how an already embedded organisation that has those links, how they have able to hit the ground and see if that has a different impact. On the action and impact summaries, I'm not going to go into detail with these, just because we are going to look at kind of more specifics of the case studies. But on page 4, you can see that we have been very instrumental in supporting the development of friends of groups for parks, helping provide assistance and funding support for warm spaces, conducting lots of beat walks on the ground with local services on page 5, working with partners, West Midlands Police, community groups, local council services in order to kind of identify hotspots and resolve some of those issues. We've been working on page 6, we're working really closely with the Waste Department, specifically Love Your Streets, to help coordinate all-out action days and again, increase the engagement that they're able to get with partners and community groups. And working really closely with the community safety team, we've been able to support, on page 7, I really need to remember telling you where I am, the local partnership delivery groups, supporting them in kind of work around, in particular, a lot of youth antisocial behaviour, but also around getting communication between residents and the community safety managers, so that these have a big back and forth. So if we'll move on to page 9 to the case studies, which is kind of the meat of this. So this is a really good example of some work that was done very early on in the programme on Stratford Road, as a particular location that had a lot of black bin bags, overflowing bins. The bins were not getting regularly collected. The local neighbourhood action coordinator, NACS for short, arranged a joint visit with the local depot's assistant service manager, exempt officers, and the enforcement officer for the waste team. And they identified that some of the premises around the shop were not registered on the system, and that was corrected. The exempt accommodation officer discovered that 3 2-bedroom flats that were just unknown were kind of present, and the waste enforcement officer discovered that some of the trade waste wasn't being disposed of properly, and there was duty of care contracts to be followed up on. So all of those things then got followed up. We got extra bins put in, the systems were put in place to kind of make sure those regular collections were occurring. Duty of care contracts followed up, and the exempt accommodation was moved from that location through interventions from the officers there. And it's just a really good example of how coordinating all of those different people in one place is able to resolve a complex problem that with the current systems might have taken longer to resolve. And on page 10, you can see on the left-hand side the before pictures of kind of what the waste looked like that was gathering there, and the pictures afterwards. And the local neighbourhood action coordinator monitors that area quite regularly to ensure that it doesn't fall back into the left-hand side. On page 11, we're looking at the youth provision for William Selio. There was an issue around young people that were causing disruption and antisocial behaviour around the local library. The local neighbourhood action coordinator contacted the school's police officer for the area, who went into the local school and spoke to them. The library was added to the list of extra police patrol coverage during Mischief Week, and there was a line of communication set up between the library manager and the local police team. But I think the most important bit was working with the local community organisations, arranged for 6 90-minute youth engagement sessions to be held across a 6-week period. Those have taken place. They've helped kind of create a diversionary activity, and we're now looking at how we develop that funding to continue that going forward. And again, through just partnership working on the ground, helping to address that kind of particular issue. On page 12, this is an ongoing piece of work in Glebe Farm and Tile Cross. It was identified in the Cottrells Lane area that there isn't a food pantry that's easily accessible for residents and that it's a particular need. So the local Neighbourhood Action Coordinator has helped to form a residents group that is then leading on this and trying to resolve that issue. We've got the resources, we've got volunteers, we've got potentially supplies. We're just trying to locate a venue that we can afford to run it from. But this will hopefully be a very, very strong piece of work, sorry, where the intervention has been able to formalise that kind of residents' support and galvanise that into action to address that local need. If we then move on to page 14, it's a really quick win that is taking place in Acock Green around the Fox Hollies area. It was identified by local residents that there's some benches that are worn, damaged and in need of replacement around kind of a local shopping centre. The local coordinator has contacted Crown Paints, which are a BCC supplier, and as part of an added social value, they have said that they will provide a free bench for that area. We're just liaising currently with Highways and the Housing Department to make sure that we've got all the relevant permissions to put that in place. And again, that's a really good piece of having someone on the ground that is able to kind of identify that and action that in a way that just wouldn't have happened with that, and being able to then leverage those kind of social add value that the contractors have already got there, so that it's not costing council any extra money to. On page 15, in Brookvale Park, there's a day of action that was that came off the back of helping revitalise the Friends of Brookvale Park, which had kind of gone down to 1 or 2 members and is now reconstituted with many more members. A lot of different partners got around the table to help with that. We had 16 people all in carrying out tasks on the day, clearing footpaths, pruning, trimming trees and hedges and picking up litter. It wasn't a huge turnout, but it was also in January on a cold, wet Saturday. So we're hoping that we'll get more people as we kind of move into the better weather. But again, the day was successful. We're learning kind of about how we can engage with people to bring them along that line. But as you can see from page 16, there's not any before or after pictures. We've just got the after pictures, but you can see where that work has been done. It's not cost the council a lot of money, and we're able to kind of provide some really good kind of obvious shows on the ground of differences made by local people. We then head down to page 18, just a quick piece in Alum Rock, where the local traders association were feeling frustrated around their concerns about litter, traffic and crime. The local Neighbourhood Action Coordinator arranged some meetings with the police and the traders association and the local councillors in regards to Challenge Art, the upcoming celebration and what the plans were for that. And a meeting with planning to discuss specific issues around parking and traffic, and those things are kind of continuing. Off the back of that local Neighbourhood Action Coordinator is working with the community safety team around kind of key messaging for Child Art and how, what the provision is going to be. There's going to be working with the local councillors to do a quick walkabout to kind of inform residents and key players about those kind of that key messaging. And then if we head down to page 22, a really good example of some help assistance with the warm spacing in St David's Church in Williams-Elliot. They'd approached the NAC saying they wanted to set up a warm welcome, but they didn't have the funding possible. The local NAC has involved with another key stakeholder that as the community champion has been able to then give them only £500, but it's enabled them to kind of create a welcome offer, and that is now how it has been running over the winter. We're looking at how we can support that to happen again and this next winter coming. On page 23, during as part of the Great British Spring Clean in Shard End, the community payback team were looking for specific locations that they could do kind of an event. That information was taken back to their local steering group, and it enabled the local residents to decide where that service was best placed. And I think that's a really good example of education in action. People with a lived experience, the understanding of the community, being able to direct where services occur. And then finally, I'd like to just talk about another really small quick win, but that highlighted the work of the Neighbourhood Action Coordinators. On page 28, there's a specific issue in Sparkbrook and Balsall Heath where one of the coordinators was conducting his beat walk. They came across a street vendor cart that was fly tipped on the side of the road. He spoke to the local traders. They advised who they thought had done it. He got the CCTV from the local trader and then approached the perpetrator and advised him to dispose of it properly, which he then did. I think it's just a really prime example of having that person on the ground who has the trust of the local organisations to be able to get that kind of information and then utilise it to prevent that becoming a fly tipping report, prevent that becoming a waste enforcement issue. There's less resource required from other teams because a quiet word was had at the right place at the right time. And we can see there's on page 29, a before and after of the item there and then not there about an hour later. So on page 30, just very quickly, the emerging themes that we're coming across as part of this programme. The impact of the cost of living crisis is very high on residents' priorities. The increasing poverty levels within the city, including both energy and digital poverty, has a big impact on residents. Increased community safety requirements, which I don't have the data to show that, but I guess it's kind of linked to that cost of living increase. And the increased demand for health and wellbeing interventions, reducing resources, and the need to effectively engage and communicate within wards and neighbourhoods. And I think we're taking some steps to kind of help rectify some of those things. I'm not going to go through the SWOT analysis with you or the risk mitigations, but they are there. I would just like to kind of finish on some really good feedback that we received from different stakeholders. So from Sergeant Gallen of the West Midlands Police, he said that the NAC has been invaluable to the work we do, being the link between council and statutory, non-statutory partners means we've achieved more since the NAC arrived to benefit the community than I was able to do so for the 2 years. It would be a huge step backwards if the role did not exist. And from the chair of the Tillecross Residents Neighbourhood Forum, the Tillecross Residents Group are delighted to have the support of the NAC, a bit of fresh air after many years of fighting to get the right person to get things done. The NAC has already made a major difference in the short space of time since working with us. We're really looking forward to the year ahead, onwards and upwards. And then finally, on page 34, from Councillor Bridle, NAC is proving to be a real action woman on the ground who can signpost residents to organisations and help. I think Neighbourhood Action Coordinators will pick up valuable learning, which I hope will be fed back to enable the council to also learn what barriers we need to push away to get things done locally to make our neighbourhoods better places to live. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Bridle?
Yes, and it is really good to have somebody on the ground working with us. Anyone better. So, definitely it's the right thing to do. I really would stress that I really want the council, very good. Maybe all councils are like this, but, we tend to sometimes bury our heads in the sand. But I think, Ian, with you hopefully leading this, that, that we will use the Neighbourhood Action Coordinators to improve on where we've got to. They've already picked up, I've had conversations with mine about what some of the issues are in the council, the barriers. So I think, if we can have some honesty and get some honest feedback from those people working on the ground about the difficulties that they've faced trying to make contact and, they'll know better than me, rather than saying to us maybe about what the problems are. But let's use that learning to kind of move ourselves forward onto the next stage. And the last point was, I remembered that this OS committee, some of us were on it when we decided this. We sent a letter when we were really dischuffed about this localisation to the previous cabinet member who was in charge of all of this. and we asked for a survey to be done of councillors, of members. So we asked for a survey, and we said it would be really useful for councillors to be asked across the board to, on a scale of 1 to 10, say, you know, do you think services are different and better suited to the area and more efficient? Do you think that local councillors have more influence on services? Do you think that officers are working for the locality first, not their service or directorate, and work together more? And do you think that residents feel that they're more in control of their services and their local area, and they feel it's getting better? I still think, Councillor Ward, that at some stage, if not now, it would be good to test out the feeling of members across the council, you know, to do a scale of 1 to 10 on those key measures of success that we set ourselves right at the start of what we were doing here. So
let me pick up those
suggestion, really.
2 points. First of all, as I said earlier, we're about to review the neighbourhood coordinators, and we'll pick up the learning you referred to as part of that review. We'll use that to inform how we will not only roll out this scheme, that's the recommendation, but also how we improve on it, because as I've said, this is an evolving agenda. On that second issue, I'd rather, first of all, that if there is to be a survey done, it's done in partnership between scrutiny and the executive, rather than one side doing it and not the other. And then secondly, I think let's allow this year to roll out a little bit, get this additional funding out to the wards, get the decision on the neighbourhood action coordinators before we start sampling member opinion, because we don't want to get opinion that's out of date.
Anybody else? Councillor Harmer.
I'd indicated. So yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Very good presentation. Enjoyed looking through the different case studies there. The ACOX Green one is actually is interesting because it does illustrate a number of points. The Foxhollies, for those that you know who may have gone through the Foxhollies shopping area, it's actually about 70% in Tyseley and Hay Mills ward and about 30% in ACOX Green ward. And so the bench is it has to go in ACOX Green ward because the Neighbour Action Coordinator is only allowed to work in ACOX Green ward, which, you know, we all need to be a little bit parochial, but I do find a little bit bizarre. I think we do, you know, certainly from all the 3 councillors, myself, Penny Wag, and Councillor Iqbal and Tyseley and Hay Mills, we've all said to everybody that just, you know, don't worry too much about the boundaries, get on and fix the problems. And I would hope that message can come down from the top. But there is, of course, a way of resolving that, which is that if we are going to, hopefully, once the review has happened, move to a situation of this being rolled out across the whole council, but rather than sharing one with Marge up, you know, which is a fair way away in terms of travelling from one ward to the other. Actually, you know, there are other. We would pal with Tyseley and Hay Mills next door, and then that would mean that shopping area is entirely covered by one Neighbourhood Action Coordinator. That area actually also goes back to my previous point, is that facing where that bench will be, there's an area of housing land, and there's a sort of broken up pick fence round the grass there, and that has been a project in the HLB environmental project for some time, but we're still waiting for the quotes put in to tidy up the fence. And so you have to look at those sorts of projects, environmental projects, sort of as a whole, and just putting a bench in on the own, you know, unless you make an effort to clear the rest of the area up, it sort of slightly misses a beat. So being able to sort of pull those different strings together is a really important part of that sort of work. But thank you.
We are going to review the partnering if the problem is successful and it rolls out. It makes that sort of common sense and logic that actually we are able to pair adjoining wards. Saves a lot of time and travel to the Neighbourhood Action Coordinator.
Thank you for Debbie.
What do you want?
Yeah, thanks. This probably goes back to previous discussions with Fleet and Waste. On that one and fly tipping, in Sparkbrook and Walsall Heath East, where the action coordinator spoke to the perpetrator, explaining they would be proceeding with their beat walking to ensure the cart was removed before they returned. If it hadn't been removed, well, there's two questions. One is, could he have issued a fixed penalty notice? And if it hadn't been removed when he got back, would he have issued a fixed penalty notice?
At the moment, he couldn't. Well, that brings me nicely. That brings me nicely. Yeah, that brings me nicely to Nottingham, because I mentioned at the beginning that I'm going to Nottingham. Some other members are coming with me. It's going to be in the coming weeks when it gets a bit warmer, hopefully, because we will be walking around outside. In Nottingham, they have these highly visible, wearing high vis enforcement officers. They have one in each ward in Nottingham. And they have the ability to go around enforcing not just one aspect, let's say fly tipping, but they can also enforce parking as well. In Birmingham City Council, there's always been this view. This is what's always been said to me. No, for issuing parking tickets, it's got to be a highways officer. For doing fly tipping, it's got to be a fleet waste officer. For doing environmental health, it's got to be a licensing officer. Now, in Nottingham, they've broken that down completely. And these highly visible officers walking the streets of each ward have the power to enforce across the board. And that's why we're going to have a look at it. And once we've had a look at it, obviously I would need to get it costed for Birmingham and have to find a way of funding that out of the budget going forward. But if we think it's something that works, and if members across the council would be keen to see the similar thing here in Birmingham, then we will look at trying to find the money to roll something very similar out in Birmingham.
I like to think if that was to proceed, it would almost become self-financing.
Be careful about saying things like that.
Thanks, Leader. We'll have to move to the next item, which is the work program. As you all know, this is the last meeting of this municipal year. And when the committee meets in June, July, it will start from where we leave, and also agree the new work program. There's this work program, this is for noting. Can I take this opportunity to thank all of the committee members? And I think we have achieved a lot in the last 11 months, and we will continue to work for the best interests of our residents, irrespective of which party you belong to. And we'll move on to the next one, number 9, request for...
Sorry, Chair. It just, I know this information was for noting, but it'd be useful if this committee has got any sort of priorities for next year that we can ensure sort of factored into sort of next year's work programme for the scrutiny committee as a whole. If there aren't anything, that's fine, but I think this is probably a good opportunity for the committee to provide some feedback to us to make sure we're picking up on the right issues, especially for meetings in June, July, next year.
One thing that hasn't been, we haven't talked about, we haven't talked about today, but I do think there needs to be a look at it, is just the issue of, the issue of damp and mould, but the impact that's now having, because what I'm picking up is that the sort of casework volume is overwhelming the system, and therefore a lot of sort of really quite basic things are taking a long time to get responded to, and it's how we get on top of that. I was actually, just before I came here, I was at a meeting with where we've had the Green Home Grants scheme, which a scheme that's being delivered at the moment is largely a private household scheme. There is some social housing mixed in with it, but the scheme that the council's just got funding for, which will be a 2-year scheme, is a social housing scheme. There's a huge amount of lessons from our scheme, particularly about the importance of communication and particular types of communication. People are incredibly cynical But anyone that approaches them says, I'm you, X or Y. And the way it's been delivered has caused a lot of problems. And I was saying to the person, you know, putting those sorts of communication issues into BCC housing that is struggling so much to keep up with it. Now, partly it's a solution to some of those problems, because if you get houses that are better insulated and so on, you won't get so many problems with mold and damp. But getting it done in a way that works for our residents, our tenants. Really important that we dive into the lessons from the scheme that's happened in Balsall Heath, Haycock Street and Tyseley, and work with the executive in terms of how this new bigger scheme is rolled out across our areas of our social housing.
Thanks, Councillor. I think the words come in the first formal meeting in July, and then we'll track what we have done in the last 11 months, but we'll have to move on into looking into the housing needs. And Councillor Wood.
I'd like to sort of, I suppose, enhance on what Councillor Armand requested. He's almost like, because it all ties in with the drive to get back to decent home standard. And I think that's what we should be pulling the cabinet member and officers in on a regular basis, because they've committed to achieve it, or hopefully achieve it by a certain time, but without having stages that we can actually monitor against it and monitor that progress towards retaining or getting the decent home standard back. It's very difficult for us to scrutinise. So I think that would be something that we would want to keep a close eye on.
Move on to the next item. Any requests for call-in or any petitions? No, no received. And any other urgent business? No. The authority to chair and officers in the meetings that agreed. Thank you. Thanks very much. The meeting is closed now.